This week I'm talking about cognitive dissonance and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Welcome to the Mindfuckery podcast, which is FeedSpot's fifth must-listen-to podcast on emotional abuse. I'm your host Elizabeth, and in here we explore areas others are feared to tread. Through my own personal journey, I know how much this hurts and how confusing life becomes. So many questions, no closure and no real answers. I've been a woundologist for over 20 years. I'm the unintentional author of Finding Lily, the A to Z of emotional abuse and divorce matters. I help you clear past life wounds, ancestral trauma, and this life wounding. And as the founder of the Inner Healing Sanctuary, I've created Wound Talking, the original wound, and Quantum Glow. I'm on a mission to help educate as many people as I can on the effects of trauma on our lives and our children's lives, and healing the wounds of our mothers and our fathers. It stops here, it stops now, it stops with us. So welcome along for the journey of a lifetime. And as ever, you're very, very welcome. This week is cognitive dissonance and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. As in other weeks, I'll read the section from the book that I wrote, The A to Z of Emotional Abuse, and then I might add in a little bit at the end after both sections. What actually happened was I went through this relationship, and there initially, the first few days, it was so peaceful, and then all of a sudden something bit in, got hold, and I was in excruciating pain and nothing made sense, and then memories kept popping up. This is what you might have been experiencing. One minute I was numb, the next minute, I was in so much pain, and tried to find out what was going on. I tried to understand and understand what was happening to me. I was getting messages over a period of time saying, I need to take time out. I'm not going to be around after this time, like setting, really strong boundaries. And then another message would come through saying, I don't want you going through this alone. I should be there supporting you. And they were coming from different places. So I might get a WhatsApp message or a text message or Messenger on Facebook. So there was this whole mix of different places that they were coming from, emails. And I didn't handle it particularly well. And I take full responsibility for that. I had no idea what was going on. And as I started to find out these different words and terminology, I would then, as I've said in previous podcasts, go and look up what, say, cognitive dissonance was, for instance. Or I'm trying to think, like word salad would be a good one. Or circular conversations that I spoke about last week. Because with the circular conversations, I had exact scenarios, and I could relate to it and say, oh my gosh, yeah, that happened to me. I remember particularly right at the end of the relationship, we were going to see a couples counsellor, and we had this conversation. We stopped, we sorted out how we were going to deal with a certain situation, and we stopped on the way home and had something to eat, and then we got home, and then the conversation started again, and I was like, we've already sorted this out. And then I got up the next day and it started again. It's like, this is exactly the same, and we've already sorted this out. And I said that we've already been through this, we came to this conclusion, but I need to see results, I need to see, and then there would be a slight twist on it. So that's done to confuse you, to make you think, what have I missed, what have I done wrong? So C is for cognitive dissonance. This is exactly why I wrote the book, because I thought, well, if I'm looking this up, in fact, actually that wasn't how it started. What happened was I was looking for something to do over Christmas. I was on my own, and I was setting up this YouTube channel, and I thought, okay, what I'll do is the A to Z of the emotional terms that I've heard. And at that time I did them, and they were like little snippets of information. And then I actually wrote an article for Thrive Global, and that seemed to get a bit of traction and be shared out. And then I was also, as I think I've explained this before, I was writing another book, and somebody turned around. I started sharing the A to Z on my Instagram, not the Instagram channel I've got now, but another Instagram channel. And the people that had published my first book, Finding Lily, reached out and said, oh, I hope this is going to be your next book. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a brilliant idea. That is how it evolved from there. So I started compiling more information and writing a bit more information on each one. And then it just evolved. into what it is now. No, always going to be more terms. I think it gives you enough information to realize that you were turned crazy. I think it gives you enough information to help you heal, to help you realize. I know quite a few people have said to me, this book has just clarified everything, and it was the healing that I needed to deal with my relationship. And then at the end, as I have done with Finding Lily, and I have done since then with Divorce Matters, put a healing section in there for tools that you can use, because to me that's what it's about. This is great having this information, but these wounds run deep. These wounds are in our bodies, like physical wounding. They land in the body somewhere, and it could be in your hip, in your arm, in your heart, in your stomach, in your foot. It could be anywhere, and they lodge in there and they wait and wait until they're triggered again. So this is why it's so important to talk about that healing journey. That healing journey isn't just about going, oh, you're an emotionally abusive person. Oh, I can see the techniques. Oh, I know why you're doing that. I can see it now. I can see this playing out. Yes, it does seem like they've got a script. Yes, it does seem like they all are the same person reading from the same booklet or information pack. And that's quite simple. Well, it is for me. Maybe it's this first time you've heard this. What I discovered really early on was that I had wounds that weren't mine. So those were the easy ones to shift. This stuff that had been put on me, that had been given to me during that cycle of abuse. But there were deeper wounds that were childhood. And then as I started looking at this person, and I started looking at childhood wounds, at parenting, and I started looking at narcissistic parents and controlling parents, and looking at various different ways that this happens as to why somebody would be like this. What's the difference? And I remember watching a program, and the interviewer was talking to a psychologist and saying, how can two people experience the same thing and yet they have two different outcomes? One goes on to abuse and the other one goes on and becomes abused. So how does this split? How does this work? And they said it's the people that are around them that support them. And that really intrigued me. That was actually probably before I even separated, maybe 2013, 2014. It really fascinated me because I was working with wounds. I have been working with wounds since, well, really 2002, maybe way before that, but I didn't realize in this deep way. And so, this information like gets lodged in my brain somewhere. It gets filed away until it matches up. It's a bit like pairs, or even a puzzle piece, that this is an element of what's going on. And then I started looking at the relationship that the emotional abuser, whatever you want to label them, if that helps you at the time, this person that has come into your life and hurt you on such a deep soul level. They could be a narcissist, they could be a psychopath, they could be a sociopath. I can't diagnose them, you can't diagnose them. They can only get diagnosed by a professional, but by having this information, it gives you an idea of the person that you're dealing with. So I started looking at these relationships, and I started to realize that they don't go through, and I think it was around about the time that I started writing this book, so that would have been about 2017. They don't seem to go through the same emotional stages that we go through. They don't have that disconnect. They aren't a person. They weren't allowed to discover who they really are. They are a non-entity. They really are like parasites, and they have so much in common with parasites. It's unbelievable. At one point, I was looking at the relationship that they'd had with their father, because I was working with a lot of women at that point. This is around about 2017 as well, whose partners had great relationships with their father. But equally, I have worked with men that have not had a great relationship, never felt good enough with their father, that have been empaths and that have been in abusive relationships. I also discovered, probably way before any of this happened, that there's also trauma that's involved in a child's life, and this happens for all of us, where we experience something and part of our psyche breaks away as a way of self-preservation. I've been doing a lot of work around that probably since 2010. So there were lots of different things. It would be perhaps in that scenario where you've got these children and the psyche is broken away, that you've got one that hasn't got the coping mechanisms now, doesn't know how to deal in adult situations, and you see that behaviour very much as a childlike behaviour spun back into or put in a certain situation. They behave at the age that they experience that trauma. Now, it might be abandonment, it might be betrayal, it might be a shaming that happened, and that might have happened multiple times. So it's so difficult for us to be able to say you're a narcissist, because I really do believe the narcissist didn't have, or the person that comes under that umbrella didn't have that disconnect. They're still connected to that mother. Whereas other people who demonstrate traits of narcissism, it's actually a trauma that happened and they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with that as an adult because they were stunted emotionally as a child. But that's my personal opinion. It's a really fascinating subject. Let's delve into cognitive dissonance. So C is for cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when we experience a state of holding two or more contradictory thoughts or beliefs at the same time. In a relationship, this can be the belief that your partner loves you, but you are experiencing conflict when their behaviour doesn't mirror their words. Your intuition might have made you feel that something was wrong, or you didn't believe the story that we're telling you. They may have blame shifted and you questioned yourself, believing this was all your fault, and they may have minimised your feelings, or they might have tried to confuse you by saying, but I told you this the other day. And then you recall the conversation, running over it, wondering if there was something wrong with your memory. This form of abuse penetrates on so many different levels. Your brain was being tricked to believe that what you were told was the truth. And it takes time to de-traumatize. For people healing from a toxic relationship, this can cause emotional confusion and anxiety. Cognitive dissonance is the reason people say that they feel like they're going crazy. But it's a very specific kind of crazy. Eventually, you might start to wonder what was happening and believe that you couldn't trust your own judgment. The term gaslighting has been taken from a play written by Patrick Hamilton called Gaslight in 1938, which was also made into a film. The story is about a man who meets a young woman. She falls deeply in love with him and she believes he feels the same way about her. When we experience any form of anxiety or go through a prolonged period of stress, our brains go into survival mode. We can't deal with any big decisions. We can barely look after ourselves. In social situations, if your experience is negative or stressful, oxytocin activates a part of the brain that intensifies the memory. Scientists discovered that oxytocin strengthens an important signaling molecule, ERK, extracellular signal regulated kinesis, which becomes activated for 6 hours after a negative social experience, causing enhanced fear, stimulating the brain's fear pathways. Cognitive dissonance or gaslighting is a very unique experience for each individual. Only a person who has gone through this very specific form of abuse will understand what it's like and how deep this trauma runs. And the worst thing you can say to someone is get over it. It's like telling someone who's suffering from depression to cheer up. If you've experienced this form of abuse, it's important to surround yourself with people who understand what you've been through. For me, understanding cognitive dissonance and the effects it had on my brain was like waking up from some form of hibernation. When I understood what I had been through, why my brain couldn't compute, why I was reacting totally out of character, and how this had happened, it was really only the very start of my healing. It was as if someone had turned on the light and the relief was huge. I wasn't that crazy. I felt the tension leave my body, and this was huge in my own recovery, but it didn't happen overnight. I still had to deal with the trauma bonding and the emotional flashbacks, as well as realizing this wasn't all my fault. This form of abuse penetrates on so many levels, so many layers. Your brain has been tricked to believe what you were told was the truth, and it takes time to de-traumatize. It's so easy to slip down that dark hole when you're faced with new facts and new situations. When I explain cognitive dissonance, I see a puzzled look as I explain the 3 stages of emotional abuse: idealization, devaluation, discard. And I see clients waking up from this veil that's been lifted. I watch them physically change before my eyes. when I looked up the definition of cognitive dissonance, they gave the explanation in the dictionary of knowing that smoking's bad for you and doing it anyway. And I remember thinking, my God, that it comes absolutely nowhere close to what it's like when you've come out of an emotionally abusive relationship. Everything that you've been told, you start to question. And some of it might be true. Some of it might be a lie. Some of it might be a half truth. And it's like somebody has just thrown your whole life. Maybe let's put it into a puzzle and there's a picture of you like a storyboard, and somebody's just thrown the whole thing on the floor, and then they've thrown something else in there, and you've got to work out which bits are true and which bits aren't. And this is why when I talk about I call them 5 pillars. I talk about the emotion, how it affects you emotionally, and how it affects you mentally, how it affects you physically, spiritually, and financially. And it's a spirituality bit that it sits on this pillar, on this post, in this area, because you're questioning everything you've been told, every belief you've had from childhood, and you're starting to wonder. And part of you is wanting to have that relationship. Now, I'm talking to you as if this is what you've experienced. This was my experience. I would have done everything at certain points during my recovery to get back in that relationship, because it started to feel safer in the relationship than it was with these emotions that were so unfamiliar to me, that would take me to my knees. I would be sitting at a desk and there would be 100 people around me on the floor that I was working, and I would just have tears running down my face and I could not stop. I would be falling asleep at 3:00 in the afternoon and I would be wide awake all night, and I'd be questioning everything I believed in, and I would be questioning everything that I'd been told. And one of the big ones was, but does that mean then that he never really loved me? And I had to come to that conclusion. Whatever it was, he felt, perhaps it was true for him at the time, and he was able to wear that mask and parade as that person. But as soon as that front door shut, as soon as the car door shut, he was in another mode with another mask on and driving off to get supply from someone else. So where I was being told that I was the centre of the universe, I was the centre of his world, and how everybody said how amazing we were together, but words are cheap. It's the action that proves that's exactly what they want, where they want to be, and who they want to be with. And this is where it sits in the cycle of abuse, because they take you from that discard back up and promise you everything. And if you felt like I felt, I could have ripped my skin off. The pain was horrible. I questioned everything, questioned who I was, why I wasn't good enough. It triggered so many emotions, and my worthiness barometer was off the chart, or not being worthy enough. And why wasn't I good enough? And why had he gone off somewhere else? And why, and that question, why, all the time. And as I said, words are cheap. It really messes with you. You've got these two thought processes that you're left with, did he love me? He said he did. Or did she love me? She said she did. And yet this is what they've done to me. And the actions don't really say that is love, until eventually you can start to process and this all calms down, and you can start to see, actually, I can see who they were. I can see the mask they were playing. I can see the games they were playing, and I can see their damaged inner child, which is actually perhaps what attracted you to them in the first place. C is for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. C-PTSD is a psychological injury resulting from repeated trauma over months or years, whereas PTSD is trauma following one single event. It's not uncommon coming out of an emotionally abusive relationship to experience C-PTSD. You unwittingly entered a war zone. Very gradually, over a period of time, you found yourself under fire. At the end of the relationship, you may have found yourself reliving the traumatic experience, having nightmares or emotional flashbacks. You might be avoiding certain situations or feel constantly on alert, feeling jittery and easily startled. Common symptoms of CPTSD are emotional flashbacks, inner or outer critic, toxic shame, self-abandonment, social anxiety, feelings of loneliness and abandonment, fragile self-esteem, attachment attachment disorder, developmental arrests, relationship difficulties, radical mood swings, hair-triggered fight-flight response, oversensitivity to stressful situations, suicidal ideation. If you're experiencing signs of C-PTSD, creating a space in your life is very helpful. You might be constantly looking over your shoulder or wondering if you're being watched through your social media. Go outside, ground yourself. Create a space within your home, somewhere you feel safe, that you can breathe deeply. Personally, for me, travel saved me. I didn't realize I was running away constantly, but when I was away and on my own, I felt something lift. I wasn't looking out for cars when I was driving, or I wasn't looking over my shoulder while I was shopping. I also created morning and evening routines that took my focus on me and away from the pain I was experiencing. A lot of people come out saying, I've got PTSD, and you haven't. You've got complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It wasn't one event. One event might be that you've experienced or watched something horrific, and I use this definition, or I use this story to explain how your body can calm down after a trigger. So you're driving along the road, it might be you're driving or you're the passenger, somebody pulls up to a junction really, really fast, and you don't think they're going to stop and that they are going to hit you. Only they don't hit you, they do stop in time. And what you're able to do is you're able to think about the whole situation, and you get out of that loop and playing the scenario over, you get an ending. It gives you an ending. You might know the road that they've come down and know that there's a really sharp bend just before this junction. Perhaps they were traveling too fast and they didn't realize the junction was behind that bend. Just for example, you can play through the whole thing of how that might have happened, and you know you didn't end up in a car accident, it didn't hit you, and you're able to shut down that whole process. You find this whole loop that happens with this scenario gets closed down. This doesn't happen with post-traumatic stress disorder. There isn't an ending. This loop is constantly playing. And the difference between post and complex is the fact that the abuse is going on all the time, multiple times a day, multiple times a week, multiple times a month. It's happening. It isn't one incident that is isolated, and that is the difference. So if you've come out of an emotionally abusive relationship and you've been told you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because it wasn't one element of that relationship that created that trauma. It happened multiple times, and that is the difference. And quite bizarrely, I don't know how I've missed this, there is another C, which is conditional love. And this is such an interesting topic. Might be something that you experienced growing up. So C is for conditional love. Conditional love is a behaviour displayed by parents to their children. It's a silent language that tells the child they are only lovable if they behave in a certain way. When the child behaves in that way, they are rewarded with praise and love. If they don't behave in the way their parent expects them to, they're punished, or any attention is withdrawn. The message the child receives is love is conditional. This message later translates in their relationships as, you will be rewarded with my love when you behave the way I want you to behave. Unconditional love is the message from a parent to a child to say, I love you without limitations. And if you've got time, you could journal on that question. Was I loved without limitations? Was I shown unconditional love? Or was the love that I received from my parents conditional? That's actually quite powerful. It might give you an idea or a guide to what you experienced and help you. And the last two in this chapter are C is for crazy, X, EX. And so I put that in X to, it wasn't going to be an A to Z if I didn't fill up every letter. And it says CZ is for crazy, making with a capital Z in the middle of crazy. I hope this week's been helpful. As I said, it's my passion to show people and how that they can heal, because you can heal from this and it's life-changing. And I'll put a link below in the description of the workshop that I'm running on the 7th of September, and I will be doing a live Q&A at the end of it, as well as showing you how to talk to your wounds and communicate to them and listen to them, and what messages they have for you and how you can heal them and release the trauma. It's going to be really powerful. I hope this is the next stage for you, because it empowers me. I love this work. It's life-changing. It's transformational. Sending you loads and loads and loads of love until next time.